who has devoted 10 years of her life to cutting out clippings and not only pasting them together but tying them together, is here again in the studio, as she is every Saturday afternoon here on KLRB-FM. And Mae, the election is just hours away.
Around the corner.
Around the corner. What have you got to say for yourself on this weekend before the election?
Oh, I'm trying not to stay depressed. I just didn't want these elections to take place until we investigated what happened in 1963 in Dallas, or 1964, the election, 1968, the shooting of Robert Kennedy. I was hoping, all along with the massive amount of material that was available to prove the conspiracies existed, that the people would get interested in the information that the researchers were pointing to, the evidence was lining up of conspiracies, and break open this secret government that keeps affecting the electoral process and pretending that we have an election where the candidates are chosen for us. I had a fantasy that some way the truth would come out before 1972 and the elections would be stopped.
You don't think it's going to? You don't think it has?
No, there's only 3-4 more days now till elections, and the president is so tightly encased in a system, a propaganda system, a police network, a Justice Department system that controls the courts where any chance of investigating the truth comes out, that it looks like they had a pretty good plan when all these murders took over. A few weeks ago we were sounding very depressed.
You're sounding very depressed now.
No, I'm not going to be depressed.
I mean, it's sort of like you've written off the United States, and why go even vote?
Well,
Is there any reason to vote, would you say?
Mr. Schmidt said this week that this will probably be the last election in the United States. I think 1960 was. Is there any reason to vote? Yes. If enough people had not dropped out, say the youth that was disenchanted in 1968, and the kids that turned away from the electoral process, or the adults that did, if they had voted for a man even as bad as Hubert Humphrey, who I can't stand, we would not have the elections on the Supreme Court that McGovern talks about now, or we wouldn't have Warren Burger as the Chief Justice. I think the appointments would have been a little more human or humane. We would have had a bungling system with a lot of errors, but we have a piece of machinery that's so cold in the White House now and so immune to, they don't hear the needs of the people. They're not listening to what the people are saying. And I was reading a biography of Haldeman in the Washington Post, how fearful he is, how people detest him, that he has no semblance of a human personality. He orders people around and controls Richard Nixon, who goes in the White House, who goes out, and sends directives and memos that are very terse and has no qualities of humanness about him. The whole staff of Haldeman, Ehrlichman, and Ziegler, Klein, a group of people surround the president, and it's a dismal place. It's all business and not much fun. And they've devoted the last years, every few years, to getting Richard Nixon elected, and that's the only thing they care about. And the cabinet isn't called into the White House, and the State Department isn't used, and it's a pretty sad state of affairs in Washington.
Well, then, so why vote then?
Well, as a buffer to fascism, I feel very strongly that a vote for Humphrey or McGovern, the more welfare rights, more consideration about people being bombed in napalm. Yeah, the Attorney General wouldn't be as blind to what happens in the courts today. I feel that it's a buffer against the total fascism. That's why I think people should vote.
Well, there have been numerous developments in the Watergate affair, and the Watergate affair, you believe, if I can speak for you in means of summary, you believe is just a part of a greater plan than simply a tactical maneuver to gain information through eavesdropping. And would you say that goes back to the Louis Tackwood allegations?
Yes, I think that,
and
right.
Maybe you should explain briefly what the Tackwood allegations are for those who are new.
For those who are new and for those who've heard the show before, I'll go into the Louis Tackwood allegations, and I think they're the most important allegations made in the United States, and the only thing that could save this democracy, or one of the few things that the media hasn't picked up yet that I've written about in The Realist. And I'm going to talk about what Louis Tackwood said and who he is again. I've done on almost every show recently because every week that we break and do our show here, Phil, in the 7 days pass and we get back together again on the air, more of what Tackwood said is being proven and being uncovered in Washington without giving him credit or linking it yet.
Okay, like what?
Like what? Well, we'll go into what his allegations were, and I'll go into the news this week and how it relates to the Tackwood. Louis Tackwood is a police informer, a provocateur that worked for the L.A. Police Department for 9 years, who quit.
How old is he?
Oh, Tackwood's about 29.
Okay.
He was
So he started when he was in
28.
his early 20s?
Early 20s, and he is
If you're to believe
Louis
him.
Armstrong is his godfather. He lived in New Orleans. He was very close, lived next door. Louis Armstrong was named after him. And he came out to L.A. and he worked as a police informer and provocateur and exposed the criminal conspiracy section of the L.A. Police Department as planning conspiracies and not finding them. And the intelligence department of the Los Angeles Police Department, he claimed, is the police state branch. They call themselves the Public Relations, and it is the group that was to overthrow America that's linked to the Attorney General in California, Evelyn Younger, to Houston, to Washington. And he exposed the police department in September 1971 because he was to hire radicals for the convention in San Diego and promote violence at the conventions and create a situation whereby martial law would go into effect and the radicals would be rounded up. And while we were in the state of martial law, they would get Nixon and supposedly assassinate him. The purpose, he said, of the Squad 19, that was the name of the operation, was total police state. And it was tied in, as I say, from California to Houston to Washington and concerned the FBI. The contact man that he was to call in Washington was Mr. White. We've gone into this before. The big top boss of the group was Mr. Martin. At the time of the arrest at the Watergate Hotel, Mr. Hunt, Howard Hunt, had the code name White, and James McCord, registered at the police department as Mr. Martin from New York City. $10 million was set aside for the overthrow of the police state in this government, and the Tackwood plan was they were hired in August and September of 71 to start rolling on Squad 19, but the convention was moved, and this is very important, from San Diego to Miami in March, so that all the new team that were arrested, the scrambling of money, the secret money, and we'll go into that in a minute, the new team had to move their operations with a shortage of time because the convention was moved, where everything was set up before the April 7th date where they had to disclose the money they received. They had to, in 1 month, move their whole operation. It'd be like a military operation planning something in Vietnam and having all to be in Laos instead 1 month later without anyone knowing how they got there or who funded it.
So you're saying that the movement of money, what has been alleged and has practically been admitted by the Republicans, the movement from Texas to Mexico to Florida or wherever that went, out of the country, back in the country, and from one account to another, you're saying that was necessitated by the move from San Diego to Miami Beach.
Yes, this is what I think happened. Because when you take a whole bunch of people like Bernard Barker, who was arrested, or Martinez and Frank Sturgis, and they have reservations for students to come into Miami at the time of the Republican conventions, that takes money to bring them in and make the reservations and pay the provocateurs. Well, this week in the news, there was an article November the 2nd, 1972, in the San Jose Mercury. A gentleman, an attorney down in Santa Ana by the name of Byron Beam, was approached by Donald Segretti. Segretti, for those who haven't heard the shows before or don't know that name, they should know it by now, is a man from Army Intelligence and the Judge Advocate's Office who worked with the President's Secretary, Dwight Chapin, had direct contact with Chapin on setting up an espionage network across the country, and he worked with Howard Hunt. Segretti worked with Howard Hunt, the same man whose Tackwood had his name, and Segretti said that Hunt approached him in Miami to hire radicals, which, see, it was moved over the Miami section, but Tackwood was approached on the West Coast if it was going to be in San Diego. And Segretti moved with this team in the fall of 71, the same time that Tackwood was hired. Well, it seems that Segretti had come to this particular attorney in Santa Ana and asked him to get him long-haired radicals to bring to the GOP convention. And you see, Tackwood was not believed by anybody when he had his news conference in L.A. because Number one, he'd been arrested on charges 9 years earlier, and number two, he was black and a police informer, and they took the word of Chief of Police Davis that he wasn't credible. They didn't check any allegations out. So they didn't want to believe Tackwood, but not wanting to believe him doesn't mean he wasn't right. I believe what he said because it fit in with my research. But here's an attorney in Santa Ana who was also approached by Segretti to hire specifically long-haired radicals for the convention.
Well, other attorneys around California have also stepped forward recently, have they not?
Yes.
And said that they were approached by Segretti for basically the same reasons?
That's right. So that one of the allegations that Tackwood made has been confirmed by Segretti and by this attorney and other persons that were hired to get provocateurs. Now, the second thing that was in the news this week was that Common Cause had a suit against the Election Finance Committee of Richard Nixon to disclose the people who funded Richard Nixon up to the date of the 7th of April.
Now, Common Cause wants to know all of them, all
They
$10
want to
million
know
worth.
$10 million, and it now runs up to possibly, they seem to have spent $20 million, so it wasn't 10 in that interim. But you see, Tackwood had said there was a secret fund set up for $10 million. So G. Gordon Liddy, the attorney in the White House, who then moved to the committee to re-elect Richard Nixon, was one of the fundraisers and a lawyer for the Nixon committee, set the date of April 7th that Richard Nixon would disclose where he gets his money from.
Now, do you contend that April 7th date was predicated on the convention being in San Diego?
No, this is what happened. I think people were getting suspicious about Richard Nixon's funding ever since he's been in office, from his original $18,000 that he had to count to up to the present. So that they said, okay, the Democrats are going to have to say what they have this year, and the Republicans are going to say what they have. So they set this arbitrary date. We'll tell you what we have after April the 7th, which doesn't make sense. But this is where the finance problem came in. When the convention was moved in March from San Diego to Miami, they had to raise the $20 million in the 2 months, just March and April, because the cutoff date was April. You see, all the money that Bernard Barker was caught with, a lot of it, $114,000, and that $25,000 that Andreas had, the man from Minneapolis, was dated after April the 7th. We wouldn't know about this money if the men hadn't been arrested at the Watergate. But you see, there was this mad scramble of money by Maurice Stans before the April 7th cutoff, because they wanted to keep if it is espionage money, and it goes back to the article I wrote for The Realist, which people on the local community can get in the Thunderbird or up at the bookstore in Santa Cruz, I refer to Nixon as the clandestine agent, and I refer to the Watergate as a CIA operation. Well, you have to account for the money after April the 7th, so all the funds that were going into this espionage activity had to be tucked away before April the 7th. And what wasn't tucked away and spilled over, which was consecutive CIA dollars, $100 bills of consecutive order, was traced to this washing CIA type of the way you handle money. So that what they got caught with was they had a deadline of the date to disclose their money, you see. But then they had to move the convention in that amount of time, in 6 weeks, and fund all the new agents. So Bernard Barker, see, he may not have been used if the convention was in San Diego. The man in San Diego may have already been paid and has his money in the bank ready for whatever he's going to do, but he can't come forward. So this is why they've spent $20 million and they can only account for 10. There may be $10 million in California that was going to create the excuse for martial law. But when you have 6 weeks to move it to Miami to get the provocations you need to prove that McGovern's people are wild radicals, they had to shift all the money and all the people, so that the context of Segretti going back and forth across the country and Bernard Barker with Hunt and all the money, I can see all the mobility because they had to set themselves up before they disclosed how much they spent.
Just as a sidelight, not to throw you off the track too much, this $10 million figure has been bandied about for quite some time. And I'm not too sure what the source of that $10 million figure is, besides the reference by Tackwood that there's a $10 million fund established for the hiring of radicals and things like that. Did the Republican organization ever say that they had $10 million up to that point?
Yeah, see, what happened was Mullen Associates, which is a public relations firm, set up all these dummy fronts for financing Richard Nixon's campaign, because corporations aren't supposed to give, and certain groups are broken down, like the Milk Fund gave through 50 organization fronts, and each one opened a separate bank account of $2,500. See, and they broke it, and they never used the banking for anything other than one check in each account. And they set up these dummy front organizations so that when it came time to announce, they themselves said, we have $10 million and we won't tell you where it came from. And it came from all, remember once on a show way back where we read off the names of all the dummy front organizations?
Oh, it's amazing.
It was just unreal that they could think of so many, and they were saying...
Kindergartners for Nixon.
Yeah, it wasn't
Dairy cows for Nixon.
That's right. Well, it says the TV for Nixon and Agnew and Nixon for TV.
Words switched around. The Finance Committee for the re-election of the president. The California Finance Committee for the re-election of the president.
Well, see,
various names used.
Here's the article from the Realist where I have the funding. It was the Robert Bennett, who worked in Mullen's public relations firm, and they admitted that they set up dummy front organizations that raised $10 million. Now, they didn't refer to Tackwood's article on their own. They're saying that they had $10 million in, there were 75 to 90 different organizations and different names, you see. So that the scramble for money is very important, and in the Common Cause suit, they were to, John Gardner and the organization was asking to disclose the funding of Richard Nixon, who was giving money. So they made a deal out of court this week on November the 2nd that they would give the names of all the people who donated to Nixon before March, but they wouldn't tell who gave it from March to April. So John Gardner made a deal, and I called a congressman today in Washington to say, you call Common Cause, this particular man's aide, investigator for him, knows my work and knows the research, and I said, you get to Common Cause and get to Washington when Congress gets back and say, you either want to know all the money or nothing. See, they said, okay, if we'll tell you how much money the President's committee got up till March, and therefore they made this deal. Maurice Stans, who's the head of the financing of the Richard Nixon campaign, who was a former Secretary of Commerce, would not have to testify or appear, and by giving all their records up to March, there will be no disclosure for congressional committees or other investigators. Then it'll all be all locked up. So the General Accounting Office is getting all the money up till March, and the point of it is that it's the money, it's from March to April that is necessary to know, because that's when the secret government had to move from San Diego to Miami. See how subtle that is.
So people might want to write Common Cause and John Gardner and ask him why he made the deal.
The San Francisco.
Would you say that?
Well, I think it would help to write to, say, Patman or Proxmire or somebody who's showing an interest, or write to Common Cause, John Gardner, and in Washington, D.C., because the whole point is anything up till March the 7th would be valuable to know. But even the San Francisco Chronicle of November the 2nd had an article, a title of the article called The Gap. And it said the gap between March 9th, 1972 and April 7th is significant. Mid-March to April 6th has been believed to be the heaviest time of the controversial contributions. See,
even the Chronicle recognizes that.
The Chronicle doesn't even know about Louis Tackwood. And they recognize that the critical contributions came from March 9th to April 7th. They said the experts on campaign spending estimate that $20 million was spent in that time. Now, you see, if 10 is sitting out there with hot money that's marked that could be linked out in San Diego, or, with espionage people, they had to have another 10 million moved to Miami. So
maybe people would like to write to Common Cause. I'm curious as to what results people are having with their letters. I know a lot of people are writing to
Are they
senators.
writing?
I've received some indications that they are. I've also received some indications that they're getting form letters back, and they're getting indirect, if not oblique, answers to their questions, if any answers at all.
Well,
I haven't heard of anybody really being satisfied with an answer to a letter that they've written to an agency or an individual.
Well, the response I get, I don't know of anyone out there or around here is really moving, their head in the direction of what the Watergate is, but I know that the news media and somebody out there, the reporters, are into it, because I brought into the studio for you to see, Phil, since I was here last week, about 60 articles. It's too bad it isn't television to see a 3-hole notebook filled with about 60 important articles in a 1-week time period since we met last week.
And I can attest to the fact that the radio broadcast wires We have United Press International teletype here, written specifically for radio, has been equally full of
Watergate
and related incidents.
Oh, that's good. We see Walter Cronkite did 15 minutes this week on the funding of the Watergate, and last week he did 15 minutes on the Watergate. So somebody...
that is extremely, I think, significant.
Yeah,
bearing in mind the fact that 15 minutes of network time is extremely expensive, and network news rarely takes more than 5 minutes on any story.
15 minutes on just the funding. You see, we're talking each week or trying to express, what is happening when you refer to the Watergate. The name of this show used to be Dialogue Assassination, and then we made it broader, Dialogue Conspiracy, and now we should just call it Dialogue Watergate, because I thought of that this week, because everything that I've been saying about the murder of John Kennedy or Robert Kennedy or Martin Luther King can be seen in the manipulation of the Watergate case, the way the agents work, the way they're protected, the way the FBI doesn't investigate the case.
So you call it sort of a microcosm.
It is. Everything is coming to a head. If people can't see this right in front of them as it unfolds, it would be difficult to understand how the other assassinations were covered up for what they were, which was a conspiracy, because the whole espionage thing, the Watergate is referred to as the espionage thing.
I see there you've got an article from our wire service, UPI.
Yes.
Nixon asked to answer spy charges. I didn't see that.
Now, this came over the UPI.
Senator Sam Ervin called on President Nixon this past Wednesday to answer personally the charges of scandal, sabotage, and spying by his administration. He said the allegations were undermining Americans' faith in their political system. Ervin is chairman of the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Constitutional Rights, wrote Nixon from his home in Morganton, North Carolina, that nothing could be more serious than the erosion of faith in the electoral process.
Well, this is what Dialogue Conspiracy is about. My research is to restore the electoral process, and now it's becoming quite evident that the Democratic Party has been sabotaged for a long, long time, and maybe people are listening would write to Senator Ervin and say, will you go into the Wallace shooting of Robert Kennedy while you're on the espionage, because there's indication the electoral process is sabotaged along all the lines that we're reading in the paper. It may lead right to these political assassinations, which it will. Did you see the article? Now, this wasn't an APUP, but it's by Michael Harris on the sabotage by Richard Nixon in 1962 when he was running for governor of the state of California, and there was a lawsuit on this particular case.
Amazing what the Watergate has done. People digging places.
They're really digging, and we'll be going.
I have not heard of this.
You have not heard of that?
Where was this article taken from?
Well, that article is taken from the San Francisco Chronicle, and the New York Times had a long article, and in essence, this is what it says, that a former Democratic state chairman, Roger Kent, charged that Mr. Haldeman, who's been named in the Watergate suit now, who's the top man in the White House with Richard Nixon, and Mr. Herb Klein, who's the head of communications with Richard Nixon, set up a pattern of sabotaging the Democratic Party when Richard Nixon ran for governor in 1962. And they have a sworn deposition in the court signed...
Wait a second. Signed by Haldeman?
Signed by Haldeman, Nixon's chief of staff, that authorized the payment of $70,000.
Now listen to this reason.
Read it. Okay.
No, I just wanted to draw attention to the reason. I can't believe this. Having read this for the first time now, it's a little hard to believe.
Read the whole article, then we'll discuss it.
Well, you've already mentioned that... I'll start at the beginning again.
Okay.
And if you've heard it before, just wait till I get something new. Former Democratic State Chairman Roger Kent charged that two of President Nixon's current White House aides set a pattern for sabotaging the Democratic Party during Mr. Nixon's unsuccessful campaign for governor in 1962. As evidence, Kent produced a sworn deposition signed by H.R. Haldeman, the president's chief of staff. Now, in his deposition, Haldeman said he had authorized payment of $70,000 to the late Joe Robinson, San Francisco petition circulator, for sending out postcards from a Committee for the Preservation of the Democratic Party in California, seeking to discredit Governor Edmund G. Brown. Haldeman's statement said the group who joined him in approving the Republican-financed mailing included Herb Klein, now White House Communications Director, Herbert Kalmbach, now the president's personal lawyer, Maurice Stans, former Secretary of Commerce and chairman of the President's Campaign Finance Committee, and Murray Chotiner, a sometime Nixon political advisor. The deposition came as part of a lawsuit that ended in 1964 when Superior Court Judge Byron Arnold, issued a ruling in which he said, Mr. Nixon and Mr. Haldeman approved the plan and agreed that the Nixon Campaign Committee would finance the project. The judge ordered the committee to cease any further activities and to turn over the $368 left in its treasury to the Democratic State Central Committee. Haldeman was questioned in 1963 by Los Angeles by Anthony Gerald J. O'Gara, now a San Francisco Municipal Court judge. Is that O'Gara or O'Hara?
O'Gara, I think.
Haldeman, I had conversations with a number of campaign people at the time we were making the decision to go into this. O'Gara, who were those people? Haldeman, well, I don't know that I can cover them because, again, it was not my practice to consult with a lot of people on things of this sort. I would say originally it would have been Herb Klein. In response to questions by O'Gara, Haldeman identified his initials HRH on 2 documents authorizing payments of $35,000 each from the Nixon campaign to pay the costs of the mailing. In the light of the official findings of Judge Arnold in 1964, Kent asked, do you believe that candidate Nixon and Haldeman are innocent of complicity in the Watergate bugging and other espionage and sabotage in '72? Let's go through that again. In the light of official findings of Judge Arnold in 1964, former Democratic State Chairman Roger Kent says, in the light of that, do you believe that candidate Nixon and Haldeman are innocent of complicity in the Watergate bugging and other espionage and sabotage in this year, 1972? The White House issued a statement last week denying that Haldeman had any connection with a secret fund that Democrats say financed political sabotage and espionage in this year's campaign. I had never heard that there had been a prior admission by anyone, by those people,
you know what
that
they
they
did?
were involved.
You know, they had a fake poll, too. You know how the polls are pushing Nixon out in that same campaign? They were charged in court for conducting a phony poll on Brown to defeat him, and that was brought up in the Washington Post, a longer article on this thing.
Well, of course, having admitted doing something once does not necessarily mean that you have done it again, but it does make you wonder. Well, it certainly does raise a lot of questions.
It raises a lot of questions. The Washington Post had a long article on Haldeman, a biography or description of him, and it said he's the kind of a person that if you went up to him and said you have ketchup on your shirt, or that you spilled ketchup on your shirt, he'd look at the shirt and say, I don't have one on. That he hedges and denies everything, accepts no responsibility, and you can't pin him down to anything. But
well, they've been saying that Haldeman is a USC graduate. He also attended UCLA. I don't know whether that means anything. But
well, the fact that he graduated.
Well,
But in that article of sabotage, Herb Klein, Herbert Kalbach,
look at those
the
names.
president's
They're all
lawyer,
people that are involved either in the
Maurice Stans.
They're either involved in the cabinet or in the White House or
Kalbach is the lawyer for Nixon. Now, this was 1962.
But all those names, with the exception of Herb Klein, have been mentioned in relation to the Watergate affair.
Oh, Herb Klein
is director of communications.
Oh,
for the
he's
president.
been mentioned indirectly in the communications thing. Actually, they're all ganging up against Klein. It's sort of an White House struggle going on right now of them, Haldeman against Klein, and he was supposed to be watching Klein.
Well, welcome back to part 2 of Dialogue Conspiracy. Part 2 of Dialogue Watergate, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
I'd say that people would be getting tired of hearing about the Watergate, but the story's different. Just added on to every week. There's new developments, so it's not really repetitious, I don't think.
It gets more serious every week. This week there was the story of wiring the nation. You see, Tackwood was talking about a total police state, the effect we'd have a total police state. And Congressman Moorhead came across last week. We talked about that emergency contingency unit that James McCord was the head of in charge of the radicals, rounding up the radicals. He was in charge of the mail. And he was arrested at the Watergate Hotel. He worked for the government in rounding up the radicals, and he was an employee of the committee to re-elect Richard Nixon, so he'd have access to all the lists of radicals. And this week the news came out that the Justice Department gave information to the committee to re-elect Richard Nixon. Ehrlichman would send over there for biographies on people's habits, or their sex habits, and their voting records, and the FBI was giving them to him, and Ehrlichman apologized. He said, I guess that was a mistake for an election campaign to use the FBI, and he was getting information from them. Well, this week, I don't know how many of you saw it, but there was an article on a secret wired nation plan, and that fits in what Louis Tackwood said, because it involved the local police and information would come through them. And a gentleman named Edward David, Jr., Nixon's science advisor, requested a study in August 71. And Phil, again, this is the fall of 71. When Segretti went to work, Tackwood went to work, and Edward David went to work for the White House, and the 300-page report that was put together in August 71, every single page was stamped administratively confidential. And this is what the plan was. It was to wire every American home, car, boat with an FM channel into a central communication system under government control. It was worked out by Nixon's domestic counsel. Now remember, in the article I did in The Realist about Roy Ash from Linton Industries, he sits on the domestic counsel of Richard Nixon, and he was a conduit of funds for the overthrow of Greece, for their fascism. And Roy Ash, the domestic counsel, was the one who got this thing worked up. And they envisioned a totally wired nation where, you know, if you have a certain part of your car that has to be on for smog, every television, every radio station, every car, boat, and home would be wired with this particular channel, 1 or 2, and later more. And they had a blueprint for a government-operated propaganda and spy system. They called it that. This is in the memo that Congressman Moorhead has. The White House denied it again. They said, I'm sure this administration will not propose something like that. Well, the White House denied that this week. But on television Thursday night, Spiro Agnew was talking on all the channels about being booed and whistled at in San Diego. And he said, we may need new laws for people like this. You see, these people are objecting to the war, or to Spiro Agnew, who's never been seen publicly except at military bases. And when he came out publicly, they booed him. So his vengeance isn't to meet the needs of the people or say, what do you want? What is it you want? Let's talk about it. How can we get it? He calls them the Nazis, the fascists. He turns it around and says, we need a law to handle you. Now, what that law is, maybe it's called martial law. Maybe that's another Tackwood allegation coming out, that he's not going to have people blow whistles at him. He's going to say what he wants, and you're going to listen or go to jail. Well, this plan to bug every home was part of what they called a New Opportunities program that was put together in Washington last year. And letters would be sent by satellite disseminating social services and alert for disaster. But the important thing was it would provide local police with information they need to combat crime. Crime, by definition, is somebody maybe who doesn't want their home wired. They say you're going to put it in, and you don't do that, so you're breaking the law. That makes you a criminal. Crime will be anybody who doesn't allow themselves to be wired. Like there's a plan to wire people within the Watts area in Los Angeles, these body, little computer things. Any person who's been in prison would wear a certain little box around him, and I have articles on that. And these have been tested too, and it gives him a direction of a radius of 5 miles to go, and outside of that he has to report where he is and when he comes back. And it's to keep track of prisoners on parole or where they are. And they're wired all the time. You can hear everything they're doing and everyone they're with. And this has been set up down to be tried out in the Los Angeles area. Have you ever seen that thing?
No, I'd like to see something written about that.
Oh,
I'd like to hear that on the air here. Maybe people would be interested in hearing that.
I'll bring it in next week. These things are in the planning stage. You know, the devices for picking up the tunes, they denied. They said, we had that plan and we scuttled it. But Congressman Moorhead's office said they have the equipment and they've tested it and that it works. So the fact that this is just a theory that we're going to use is not true. The deniability of the White House is so unreal, the circumstances that are happening. Spiro Agnew got on television, Meet the Press, last Sunday and denied that all the charges of Dwight Chapin and the White House being involved in the Watergate were just rumors. And Monday, the news came out that they admitted that they had funds in the secret fund and who handled the fund. So the Vice President of the United States gets on and tells you none of this is true, it's hearsay and rumor. And the very next day, the people say, yes, that was the testimony we gave before the grand jury. And the Vice President is there telling you everything is all right in the land, and he's simply lying, you know, and you can't trust anyone on this team with their deniability. That what the decision about this particular broadcasting system, it was that it would make use of modern communication techniques in dealing with national problems. they would handle unrest if there's unemployment and starvation. That becomes a national problem and people get hungry and protest. You eliminate the people that
Well,
are
it didn't
speaking
say
up.
they were going to deal with starvation that way, did it?
Well, what the people that are protesting, like in Washington this week, are a group of Indians asking for less than starvation share of their thing that's going on. All the treaties were broken. They never got fair housing, education, food to eat, and wildlife and fish being taken away. That's starvation.
Yeah.
But given a system where everybody's wired or bugged, they wouldn't meet in Washington again and scream and yell. You just simply remove them back to the starvation level.
Yeah. This wired nation concept is not new. It's been talked about among broadcasters. The government did propose, and to my knowledge is still considering, a system whereby on direction from the White House or from one of the national headquarters, like at Stone Mountain, these special transmitters, government transmitters, would be installed all over the country, and they would be able to go on the air. The government would be able to go on the air through every radio and television station in the country,
And give orders.
and immediately transmit information, and it would go to every radio and TV set, whether it would be on or not.
Yeah.
It would automatically come on, whether you had the set on or off, and no matter what station you were tuned to, it would come on over that station, and the government would be broadcasting through every receiver in the country, radio and TV.
Well, these
And
things
that
are,
has been on the drawing boards for a long time.
see, this is the way they took over Greece when they cut all the communications except certain channels or radio stations. Then they get on the broadcast and they say, every person with a weapon, turn it in. And if you don't do it, you're thrown off to Greek island and tortured and become a prisoner. If it's broadcast through every station that you turn in your gun, you either do or you don't. And everyone march out in front of the houses, and these people will go this place, and like in Germany, and others will go there, and you'll be shipped off on trains. All of this is possible because if they own the communications and they give the orders, anything that you fight back, you become a criminal because the order comes down from the state. The important thing is the connection to the police units. This is what Tackwood was talking about, and I think 1 or 2 years from now people are going to be sorry that they didn't take those allegations seriously and didn't write to congressmen and while this Watergate thing is being opened up, didn't show any interest in what's happening.
We've strayed from the Watergate. Let's return. You have a lot of material still there.
Well, here's a McGovern-Shriver newspaper, which has an address here, and it has the dates of keeping up with the Watergate, because on this show we could just barely cover 1 or 2 articles, and I wanted to use the funding, how it pertained to the Tackwood and the provocateurs that were hired, and the police state that Tackwood talked about, the whole national broadcasting thing. So we can't cover all the articles, but this little newspaper has a resume of the news from September 21st. It's a 3-page article, 2 pages and a half. It comes from the McGovern-Shriver headquarters on memorandum on the Watergate, and the address is 1910 K Street, Northwest, Washington, D.C., 20006. And you can pick it up, this little newspaper. This one is dated October the 24th. And there's a first one that came out, September 21st, and then the next one is October 24th. And they have these mimeograph pages with a resume of what has been happening, so that if people want to become more informed, write and get this information. There's not even a prize on it. And
Write to Dave Reinhardt.
there's no reason not to be informed on this, Give the address again, and you'll get the McGovern-Shriver newspaper.
It's actually, I think, a news release. It details it's a chronology of the Watergate affair from those dates that Mae mentioned. And write to Dave Reinhardt, Reinhart, 1910 K Street, Northwest. 1910 K Street, Northwest, Washington, D.C., 20006.
Now, in my first article in The Realist on the CIA operation, how the CIA overthrows the government and affects the electoral system, I use the example of the deniability, that whenever somebody's caught, they give great denials about what happened, whereas the evidence doesn't fit those denials. And the Los Angeles Times this week, dated October the 30th, the Monday paper, has a full page, and it's called The Watergate Reviewed. the allegations and denials. And if anybody's interested, write the Los Angeles Times for the October 30 issue. And it's by John Lawrence from the Times Washington Bureau. And what they do, they talk about the Watergate affair, how it started. Then they begin with the evidence of who the men were, and they go into the deniability. And then they go into the truth of the background of the particular men. They go into the involvement of John Mitchell, the deniability, then the source of the actual information that caused them to deny in the first place. They go into Bernard Barker's bank accounts, then the deniability, then the source of where the money began to leak from. And this is a full page with many, many sources of actual factual information. It's a marvelous article.
The Times did endorse Nixon.
They did endorse Nixon. Well, you know, there's an article in the Los Angeles Times today, and it was a letters to the editor.
Thursday?
No, it was Thursday's paper. It was a letters to the editor, and it was said, even though the Times endorsed Richard Nixon, the following people are voting for George McGovern. And they printed in the letters to the editor, and it was a long, long list of the Times employees. It was really far out. And they wanted on record that even though the boss was for Richard Nixon, they weren't. And even exposing all of this.
Were those reporters or pressmen or what?
People that work on the staff, maybe set the ink, the typesetters, the reporters, a whole, none of the name reporters that I know, but a whole group of them signed this, you know, and it's really far out. Now, this week's news, I brought in the articles. There was a long two-page article in the Washington Post on the biography of Dwight Chapman, the press secretary, the man who makes all the, not the press, the man who makes all the appointments for Richard Nixon. And it's a two-page article, and it was very revealing for several reasons. Dwight Chapman's father is vice president of Garrett Corporation, the aerospace industry. And in my article, when I write about the origins of Richard Nixon, how he's controlled by the aerospace industry, I thought it was interesting that the man who makes all the appointments for Richard Nixon is the son of Norman Spencer Chapman, vice president of Garrett Corporations. And the father-in-law of Dwight Chapman, the secretary for Richard Nixon, his name is John Howland, and he's with the Santa Barbara Bank of America, one of the California banks bonded by the radicals in 70 and 71. Now, the Isla Vista shootout was provocateurs. Captain Honey Fritz from the L.A. Sheriff's Department came up to that riot. The Santa Barbara law enforcement said they could have handled it. Honey Fritz was removed from office for a while and was under investigation because he had told people if you kill somebody, a student in the building, it's all right, carry 2 guns. He was alleged to have said to drop it to make it look like 2 were fleeing. He was involved with a lot of violence, Honey Fritz, and unnecessary violence up at Isla Vista. And I met a fellow who worked with the Sheriff's Department and told me about the links of a particular captain under Pitchess in Los Angeles who also is connected to the Manson affair. And it gets very interesting to see the relationship of Chapman's father-in-law to that bank in Isla Vista, that Bank of America, because I've been following the links of the Isla Vista to provocateurs to the police state. And the man, U.S. Attorney Robert Meyer, was investigating the Isla Vista provocateur violent situation at the Bank of America when he received a call from Patrick Gray in Washington and said, don't investigate the Isla Vista. So I thought it was interesting this week to learn that Dwight Chapman's father-in-law happens to work at that Bank of America that is involved where they came down on the students as being violent radicals, and actually it was a provocation again. The Washington Post has an article, the Los Angeles Times is putting pressure on the newspaper men Jack Nelson and Ronald Ostrow to get the notes of Alfred Baldwin, who worked at the Watergate. He was at the Howard Johnson Hotel receiving the tapes with the Watergate group, got immunity from arrest for turning evidence on them. There's going to be another fight in the courts. The newsmen are getting pressured to produce their notes, and he won't produce them, so that the judges ordered the Times to produce them. The men won't do it, so you're going to see this coming up. There's going to be about 32 files or suits or investigations slated already on the Watergate. I have listed about 22 now at home. Congressional investigations, like one committee in Congress just investigating James McCord and others, the funding. this lawsuit now ordering these men from the LA Times to produce. I have a list at home of all the suits, and they're just going to pile up as the months go on. Another interesting article was from the Washington Post dated October 22nd, and they go into the personalities of the men involved at the Watergate Hotel. So you see, this pile of articles that I have that goes on, Phil, is
It's
getting...
not repetitive either.
Oh, no.
Each one seems to take a different facet of this.
Yeah, see, this one is a brief biography, maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs, on Herbert Kalmbach, a new name to people, the president's attorney who's making that deal for that house, that he just got down at near San Diego. Now, there's Maurice Stans. These are the people that they're writing up, new names that are popping up in the news that make the entourage around Richard Nixon that are involved in the Watergate espionage activities. See, this article is Dwight Chapin, Gordon Strachan, Ken Clausen, William Timmons, Glenn Seedham Jr., Howard Hunt, Robert Mardian, G. Gordon Liddy, James McCord, Fred LaRue, Robert Odell, Hugh Sloan, Herbert Porter, Jeb Magruder. The news is coming in not with a little AP wire, but 2 pages of a newspaper. That's a lot of news on one article, isn't it, Phil? That pours in this kind of...
It's very unusual.
It's amazing. And the name of this article in the Washington Post was Charges Involve GOP Figures. Now, in summary, we're running out of time, and I have all these news articles, but what's coming out of all of this, one of the things that's coming out, is that a group of people from the University of Southern California, a group of young people, were active in the politics there. They were a secret society that took over the elections of student body presidents when they were at University of Southern California, and they involved Segretti and Haldeman or Ehrlichman or Ziegler, and a group of young people that worked at the University of Southern California who ruined the electoral process for the student union at the time, who supposedly disrupted through an espionage operation. It seems that they were the training ground or the proving ground for a larger espionage group later, that they used their student activities at the University of Southern California. If some boy was running for student body president, they got 5 people to oppose, to split the votes, and they stuffed the ballots. They were doing actually illegal, dishonest things, taking down posters as a team at the University of Southern California. Then they all went on to law school, some to Bold Hall, some to some to UCLA, some to UC, and they went on to law school. Then they went to the J. Walter Thompson Agency, the advertising agency. Ziegler, Haldeman, Ehrlichman took positions and then went on to the White House. And that fits in with the article I did with Richard Nixon on how Richard Nixon really came to power, that he was this clandestine
You did an article
agent
with Richard Nixon?
about him in the Realist about Nixon. And the article was timely because it came out as the unfolding of the Nixon comes out. And it seems that he is encased, on many shows I talk about B.B. Rebozo as being his sitter outside the White House, and Haldeman covers the White House. And it seems that this team of supposedly young people completely control who makes the appointments, who he sees, what's said to the press. Everyone around him, the communications, is in control of Richard Nixon, and they came from a set group at one particular place into one office onto the White House. And everyone else that affects the electoral process, like a lawyer from California who was in Vietnam, then at Fort Ord goes right to the White House to work with Dwight Chapin and Richard Nixon's lawyer, Kalmbach. You see, those men were all working Maurice Stans in '62 when he was running for governor. So evidently, all the charges that I made based upon my research before this came out, that he was a select agent manipulated by Aerospace and Bank of America since '45, you can see in the news where he's been since 1960, the manipulation, and '56, where Chotiner and that group were all working with him. This team has been working with him all along, and as the evidence of the Watergate comes out, the summary of the articles every day coming out is the connecting links of these teams. Like one of the articles I outlined was that Mr. Chapin takes all of his orders from Haldeman. He's worked with him for quite a few years, 8 or 9, 10 years he's worked for him. And it says he was 31-year-old appointment secretary for the president now. This is from the Washington Post. Has taken orders from Haldeman for 10 years, from the day that Haldeman was his boss at the J. Walter Thompson Advertising.
This has been Dialogue Conspiracy, a public affairs presentation of KLRB News. If you have questions that you want answered on future programs, or any comments, write Dialogue Conspiracy, KLRB, Box 3904, Carmel, California 93921. I'm Phil Kogan.